the muscle unit and how you guys can go ahead and study the best for the muscles. So first of all, what is it that you need to know? You definitely need to know all of the muscle names, okay? And you'll notice that they are in Latin, and you should become familiar with the spelling. So it definitely takes a lot of practice. You know, some of the muscles you may have heard of before. You've heard of your biceps, you've heard of your pecs, but now you're going to have to know their real Latin names. So it's actually Biceps Brachii, it's actually Pectoralis Major. You need to know their full names and the spelling. Next, you need to know where they're located in the body. So I've seen questions where it might say something like, which of the following is not a muscle of facial expression? And it will list a bunch of muscles, and one of them might not even be on the face. So if you understand where they're located, you'll be able to answer questions like that. They also might ask, you know, which of the following muscles is not found on the anterior of the thigh? And then finally, you definitely want to know their main action. So many of the muscles have more than one action, but in your book, what you'll find are tables that list all of the muscles and their actions. So I would memorize the main action. For example, something like flexing the arm at the elbow, or abducting the arm at the shoulder. Okay, those are the kind of actions we're looking for. Honestly, this unit is just a lot of memorization, so you could print out those tables from your book and, you know, create flashcards for yourself. You can make your own flashcards, but it's just a lot of rote memorization. I would definitely also watch the video on the muscle models that I've already posted for you, because in that muscle video, the instructor goes over not just the names of the muscles and where they're located, but also their actions. Finally, you should be aware of some of the vocabulary associated with the various muscles. So sometimes you'll ask questions like, what is a synergist to the biceps brachii? Or what is its antagonist? And you need to know what they're talking about there. So in that case, let me just show you this example. The synergists are the muscles that help move in that same direction to do the same action. So if the biceps brachii is flexing your arm at the elbow, there's other muscles that do the same thing. For example, the Brachial Radialis and the Brachialis are both synergists in that action. The antagonist is the muscle that does the opposite action. So if we're saying that biceps brachii is the agonist, then its antagonist is the triceps brachii. Why does this happen? It happens because muscles can only pull. Okay, they can only pull, not push. And for that reason, if you're trying to flex at the elbow, well, how are you going to pull your arm back into its regular position? Only the antagonist can do that, and it will extend at the elbow, okay, doing the opposite action. Now, if your main action that you're talking about is extension, then it's actually the triceps that would be the agonist, and the biceps that would be its antagonist. So it just depends on how you're phrasing the statement. Which action are you talking about? The main action is being done by the agonist, and then the opposite action is being done by the antagonist. So next I want to talk to you a little bit on suggestions on how to study this stuff, because there are a lot of muscles, and unlike the bones, which at least kind of look different from each other, many of the muscles end up looking very similar to each other. So the book has it organized by the axial muscles and the appendicular muscles, similar to what it did with the skeletal system. However, that's not how I would study it. I would study it by region of the body and then by main actions. So starting with the head, I would look at all of the muscles that are responsible for facial expressions. And those guys at least do look kind of different from each other, so I'll show you in the next slide what they look like. In addition, their location kind of lets you know what their action is. So if it's around the eye, it's going to have something to do with the eye. If it's around your lips, it has something to do with your mouth. You also have muscles of mastication, which have to do with chewing. And then finally, you're going to have some neck muscles that have to do with moving the head. After you've learned the head really well, I would move on to the anterior trunk and try to learn all of the chest and abdomen muscles. These ones are not that bad because they have to do with exercises. So if you have gone to the gym before, or you know someone who's really into working out or is an athlete, you know how they work out their pecs and their abdomen, and they want that six-pack. So what we're going to look at is just what is the real name of those muscles, what's their actual Latin names. Then after you've done the anterior of the trunk, go ahead and move to the posterior for the back. Next, I would move to the upper arm because there's only a few muscles here. Let me think, there's 1, 2, 3, there's only 4 muscles that you need to know for the upper arm, so it's not bad at all. Next, the thigh. The thigh does have a lot of muscles, so I would start with the anterior and then move on to the posterior. And you can, again, learn them by groups. So for example, learn all the quads together. In the posterior, learn all the hamstrings together. And then on the medial side of the thigh, you have all of your adductor muscles. There's quite a few of them, but they have basically the same action. So if you clump them together that way, it's a little bit easier to learn. Next, the lower leg. The lower leg only has a few on your list that you need to know. I think, let's see, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or 6. I can't remember exactly, but there's only a few that you need to know for the lower leg. And then I would do the forearm the last because this one's really tricky. Okay, so I'll try to go over that one with you. So again, I'm not going to go over every single muscle simply due to the fact that, So I'm not going to go over every single one of these muscles due to the fact that you already have your other video that you can watch. And again, all of these muscles are labeled in your book. But let's just take a look a little bit at the face on what's going on here. So remembering that muscles can only pull, this will help you with actions. So look at the frontalis, okay? Here's frontalis. Someone was asking me whether you need to know the origins and the insertions of the muscles. I personally am not going to ask you for those, but understanding where the muscles attach to the bone is really helpful because the origin and insertion is telling you what are the two places that the muscle is attached, and they're going to be pulled closer together. So for example, if this muscle is attached up here on your cranium and is also attached here, then when it's doing this pulling action, you can kind of figure out what its action is. It's going to be to lift your eyebrows. Okay, so think of like a surprised face. You're lifting the eyebrows. Then what about these two muscles? These two are your zygomaticus muscles. So they're actually located here on the zygomatic bone and then also at the corner of the lips right here. So if they're pulling, what action are they doing? They're pulling the lips upward and back, for example, when you smile. Meanwhile, you have other muscles down here that are connected to the mental region of the mandible, so down at the chin, and then also at the bottom of the lip, pulling down. So what are they doing? They're pulling the lips down and actually down and out, kind of like if you're pouting. Over here, this muscle, very important, the masseter muscle, connected at the zygomatic, and then also down here at the mandible. So it's pulling up. What is it going to do? It's going to close the jaw, basically elevate the jaw for when you're chewing. And then there are a couple other ones like these round muscles. Okay, so round muscles, they don't really pull or push, but what they do is they squeeze. So if you're going to squeeze this, what are you doing? You're closing the eye. You're basically causing the eye to squint closed. And the same idea around the lips. If you squeeze that muscle, you can purse your lips or close your mouth. And on the side, we can see some of them a little bit better. So the two muscles of mastication that you can see are the masseter right here, and then actually the temporalis right here, which starts up here on the cranium. And then you can't see the rest of its attachment point, but it's down over here on the mandible, so deep to this muscle, right? And what it's doing is it's pulling up, also helping to elevate the jaw during chewing. Okay, so then you have 6 eye muscles. And the only hint I really have for that one is that you need to know whether you're looking at the eye from the left or the right view. Otherwise, you're going to get really confused. But other than that, these muscles aren't too bad because you have to, if you look at their name, they're basically named after the direction. So superior versus inferior, lateral versus medial. And then oblique just means that it's going at a diagonal. And then right here, this little guy right here is actually called the trochlea, which is why one of them will be innervated by something called the trochlear nerve. So we'll talk about that later. All right, for the neck, I think there's only a few muscles that you need to know in the neck. Definitely know the really big one. So sternocleidomastoid, sterno for the sternum, cleido for the clavicle, and then mastoid is the mastoid process of the temporal bone. So its action is it actually can do a couple things, but basically it can pull the head forward, like if you're nodding. That's if both sides, the left and the right side, are both working together, it'll pull the head forward. But it can also pull the head laterally. So if only one side is pulling and the other muscle is relaxing, then you can, turn your head that way. Let's see, what other muscles do you need to know in the neck? So the digastric. The digastric is actually, looks like that. And what's going on is di for two. Gastric actually means stomach, so saying it has two stomachs, but what they're saying is that there's this portion of the muscle and this portion of the muscle, but they're together. Okay, so that's the digastric. I think the other one you need to know is the mylohyoid, which is underneath of it, so it's deep, and that's just right here. And it's supporting the bottom of your mouth, so the underside of your jaw. All right, moving on to the anterior trunk. You've got your pectoralis major right here, and then actually deep to it. So notice this is the superficial side on this side, and then the deep side. So right over here, this is your pectoralis minor. Then you have your rectus abdominis. This right here is just connective tissue. Okay, so it's easier if you can see the pink of the muscle, then you know they're talking about the muscle and not the connective tissue, which is white. So rectus abdominis allows you to flex at the spine, basically flex your vertebral column. So it allows you to bend forward. You've got your external oblique on this side. Then this, they cut it, but there's supposed to be the internal oblique here. And then, oh wait, no it's not. This is supposed to be internal oblique here. And then this little guy is the deepest one on this picture. Okay, so that's your transversus abdominis. Other big muscles that you can see from the anterior view is of course your deltoid, which has to do with moving the arm. So it's moving the arm up, which is called abduction. And then these little guys here are the serratus anterior. Okay, on the back, superficial and deep again. You've got trapezius. Trapezius is a really, really big muscle. You've got latissimus dorsi. That's also a really, really big muscle. And then once you start removing those muscles, you can see all of these various muscles that are connected to your scapula. So hopefully you've already learned all the different parts of the scapula when you were learning the skeletal system, but now it will make a little bit more sense. So you had the supraspinous fossa. Inside of it is this muscle, the supraspinatus. Then you had the infraspinous fossa. There it is, infraspinatus. You also have teres major and teres minor, which help moving the arm. And then you see some of the back, the posterior view of the arm here as well. This is just another view of the scapula. So this is the posterior view here. This is the anterior view. It's one of the only ways you'd be able to see this muscle right here, which is called the subscapularis. Okay, so here we've got forearm. So why do we call it the biceps brachii? It is important that you call it biceps brachii because there's a different biceps in the body as well that's located elsewhere. So biceps, it has two heads. That's because if you look up here, see how there's two different origins, okay? And then the insertion is down here, so it's pulling up, which is flexing at the elbow. And then deep to it, this is the deep side, you have, this is brachialis, and then you have coracobrachialis here. Next, moving to the anterior of the thigh. So the quadriceps include the middle muscle, which is the rectus femoris, and then you've got vastus lateralis on this side and vastus medialis on this side. So you do need to know if you're looking at a left or right thigh to make sure that you are orienting yourself correctly. On the same note, I would memorize these little guys on the inside, just memorize them in order. Okay, so you have the iliopsoas group here. Then you have the pectineus. Then you have some of your adductors. So you've got adductor longus, and then deep to it, it's kind of underneath there, is adductor brevis. And then this really long one is gracilis. Then on the other side, this is actually more on the lateral side of the leg. You'll see a better view in a little bit. That's the tensor fasciae lata. So that was what I just circled right here, tensor fasciae lata. This really long thing here is actually not a muscle, it is a connective tissue, okay, so that's why it looks white. And then from the back, so this is posterior view, you can see the hamstrings. So the hamstrings have three muscles. This one right here is biceps femoris. Okay, so that's why I was saying biceps brachii in the arm, biceps femoris in the leg, and then there's two here. Let me just use a different bit of coloring. The top one is semitendinosus, and then the one underneath is the semimembranosus. The way I remember is there's this little bit right here that looks like a tendon, which it is, it's actually a tendon. So semitendinosus is the one with that really big tendon, and then deep to it, so both on this side and on this side, like right underneath of it, that's all semimembranosus. All right, and then we've got the lower leg. I'll let you figure that one out on your own. And then let's look at the forearm. So the forearm, I think, is probably the most difficult of all the muscles to remember. And the first thing you need to know is your view anterior or posterior. So this right here is your anterior view. This is your posterior view. Obviously, it's a little bit harder to tell on a two-dimensional drawing like this, but on a model, it would be pretty obvious. So on the anterior view, the largest muscle right here that kind of makes your forearm beefy looking, that's your Brachial Radialis. And then you have 1, 2, 3, 4 more muscles here that you need to know. So how do I remember them? So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and they go with the following letters: P, F, P, F. So the first one is called pronator teres, and pronator means its action is to pronate your arm, which means when it pulls, you actually end up turning your arm in such a way that the palm is facing down. Then the two F's are both flexors. And what are they flexing? They're flexing at the wrist. So if you follow this muscle all the way down, that's where it ends. And if you follow the other flexor all the way down, that's where it ends. So they both end at the wrist. They're going to be flexing your wrist. So one of them is called Flexor Carpi Radialis, letting you know it is flexing the wrist over here on the radius side. So this is the radius side of your hand, right? If you were from an anterior point of view, the radius is on that side. This side is the ulna side. So this one is called the Flexor Carpi Ulnaris. And that kind of lets you know what's its action. It is flexing the wrist. And then the middle one is just called Palmaris Longus. So if you follow that one all the way down, where is it? here it is, sorry. This is Palmaris Longus. You can see it ends over here at the palm, so it's also helping to flex, but it pulls on the palm. Now on the other side, unfortunately the names are even more confusing because they all start with the same letter. So they're going to be a bunch of extensors. So first, this little guy right here is actually Brachial Radialis again, just from the other view. But after that, we have extensor, 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 and finally, that's actually a flexor over on the other side. So what's going on with these guys? So these two are extensor carpi radialis. Okay, because they end, it's kind of hard to tell, but they end here, which is the radius side. Okay, they go all the way down to the wrist again. So they have the opposite action of the flexor carpi radialis. So extensor carpi radialis. There's actually a longus and a brevis. That's why there's two of them there. Next, this middle one, see how it goes all the way here and it goes down towards the fingers? Okay, so that's extensor digitorum. And just follow the tendons all the way to the fingers. That lets you know it's helping you to extend your fingers. Basically, like if you were flaring your fingers out and back, that's the motion there. Then over here, you have the extensor carpi ulnaris. Okay, because it ends right here again at the wrist. And I believe that is all the ones that you need to know for lab. Possibly you need to know some of these deep muscles. There's actually a ton of muscles in the arm and in the hand. This little guy also helps with pronation. And then this is just showing you the supinator and the pronator. So this big one right here is the pronator. And then underneath of it, the supinator just has the opposite actions. So to supinate your arm means to turn it in such a way that your palms are facing up, kind of like you're begging for some soup with your palm facing up. All right, so just quickly, I wanted to wrap it up by looking at some of the muscles on our lab models. So we've got your orbicularis oculi, orbicularis oris, Zygomaticus major and minor, risorius, temporalis here, frontalis here. From the side you can see masseter, and then deep to it, that's the buccinator. There's temporalis again. You can see occipitalis from the back. This is sternocleidomastoid. Got pectoralis major, external oblique, rectus abdominis, internal oblique. I don't think you can see the transversus in any of these. We don't have a model like that. You've got serratus anterior on this side. You can also see serratus anterior here. This one is pectoralis minor. And then you can actually see the intercostals. So external intercostals are going to be on the more superficial side, and then the deeper side is going to be the internal intercostals. Those guys move the ribs when you're breathing. Trapezius is this huge one all the way here. Trapezius, Latissimus dorsi. Here, they've already numbered them for you. So this is on the photos that you can find on Adverum. So they'll be available for you there. And my students from last session already color-coded them and numbered them for you, so you can kind of practice that way. Let's see what else we've got. Okay, so anterior thigh. Rectus femoris, and you can identify here's the tendon that's going to connect here with the patella. Then we've got vastus medialis, vastus lateralis. The really long thin one is gracilis. And then for these internal ones, again, I would just learn them in order. From the back, this one's a little exaggerated, but right here is supposed to be Gluteus Maximus, And then Gluteus Maximus has two smaller muscles underneath. You've got Gluteus Medius, so here it's a little bit exaggerated how big it is, and then there's a Gluteus Minimus underneath that. On this side, we've got our Biceps Femoris, and then again, this top one right here is going to be your semitendinosus, and then semimembranosus is deep to that. We've got some lower leg. So they're showing the really big one here is gastrocnemius, which is connected to your Achilles heel. Okay, so it's very important for when you're walking and running. And then deep to that is soleus. And then over here, Tibialis Anterior. You can find it because it follows along the tibia, so your tibia bone. Let's see what other ones you need to know for the lower leg. So Extensor Digitorum is a little bit trickier to find, but the easiest way to find it is usually to follow these tendons up the leg. And so it's not going to be Tibialis Anterior, that was the first one, but next to it, it extends into these tendons into the toes. So that's going to be your Extensor Digitorum longus. And then this is anterior view of the forearm. So you've got your pronator right there, Flexor Carpi Radialis, radialis side, Palmaris Longus because it's going all the way down to the palm, and then Flexor Carpi Ulnaris. And then on the other side, this one is your Brachial Radialis, followed by Extensor Carpi Radialis, and then I think this is longus here, brevis here, then Extensor Digitorum, and then Extensor Carpi Ulnaris. You've got the Digastric here, wrapping around, and then the mylohyoid is underneath. The diaphragm can be seen from underneath in our torso model. And then this is what some of our eye models look like. All right, so that wraps it up for muscles.